Welcome back after the break. Now let's quickly continue with the different street patterns. Now we discussed the gridiron pattern. Now if you look over here, there's a perfect example of it. As you can see, it looks like a gridiron. Where will we find it? Mostly in the CBD and mostly one ways to avoid traffic congestion. But as you can see, it's quite boring, but still very important because it's found in the CBD and it doesn't use a lot of space, and because land is so expensive over there. If you look at radial street patterns, it's moving outwards. Now many towns have a radial pattern, for instance Stellenbosch, and Kimberley is another example. It looks like a spider web. Now Paris is a very good example. If you look at a global city, it's from the Eiffel Tower outwards. Now if you look at the advantage of it, it makes traffic much easier, so it can avoid traffic congestion. All the roads leads to a central point in town because basically, let's say for instance, it's radial, it's outwards, so it doesn't matter if you travel towards the central point, everyone will get to the same point. The disadvantages, it can cause traffic jams, and the traffic is quite slow because of the curved roads. Now there's the example of a radial street pattern. As you can see, everything leads to the central point, and this central point might be a historical monument or it might be a church. Our next street pattern is a planned irregular street pattern. Now there's very few intersections and it curves a lot. Now the reason why people tend to use this pattern is when the gradient is not that gentle, when it's quite mountainous or it's up a slope. The advantages of it, now many modern cities that develop uses this pattern. It improves the flow of traffic. The roads are quieter because there's fewer intersections. And it's interesting. It makes it interesting to see, to travel. And very importantly, probably the most characteristics over here is accommodates the nature of the topography. So if it's a steep area, let's say for instance this town or city is developed in the valley area, this is the type of street pattern that they will use. The disadvantage of it, it's easily to get lost and it's very easy to expand. Now if the urban area had to expand, it's going to be very difficult to expand this street pattern as well. As you can see on this diagram, planned irregular pattern. It's mixed shapes and sizes, especially in suburban areas, but very importantly over here, we can use it on places that's quite uneven. Our last one is unplanned irregular street patterns. Now the reason why they develop is because it's when suburban areas or urban areas just develop over a very short period of time. Not a lot of thought went into developing street patterns because of all the sudden increase of people and urban settlements that pops up. And that's the case of informal settlements over there. What's the advantages of it? It's unique, it's not boring. It's got twists and turns everywhere. Disadvantages of it, traffic congestion. There's no flow because no one did the proper job planning it. And you can get lost very easily. For instance, in informal settlements like townships where there's a lot of shacks. And as you can see, there's no regular pattern. It's all irregular, and you can just imagine getting lost quite easily over there. Now, we've looked at the different urban land use zones when we look at the urban profile. Now, what I've added here is some photos because many of you might come from rural areas or very small towns. Now, this is your central business district, like I explained it to you. Skyscrapers, massive buildings. The reason why we're going up because of the land value, and there's an orthophoto map of a CBD. As you can see, very important, please pay attention. Look at the gridiron street pattern that we see over here. See that? Okay. This transition zone is just surrounding the CBD. Okay, it might be commercial, be used for commercial areas, commercial by selling products and that, making shops, or it can be used for residential areas. It's usually the zone of decay, we'll discuss it, where slums are. Simple reason why it doesn't look very good. A lot of crime activity taking place over there. And it's usually the working class residents living over there. The property sizes are very small, it's usually apartments and flats, or very small property sizes. Now, if you look at the light industries, you usually find it just on the outskirts of the CBD as well. The reason why we allow it, because it doesn't cause a great amount of pollution, noise pollution and air pollution. It's very close to the CBD and it's close to the transport networks to basically take their product to different areas. As you can see over there, heavy industries like we discussed before, usually on the outskirts of the urban areas. Why? Because of the amount of pollution that's being created and because noise pollution and air pollution, and very importantly, close to transport networks so they can take their product and deliver it to other parts of the country. And very importantly over here, it needs to be on flat land. And if you look at the reason why we chose these locations, because there needs to be availability of water, because they use the water to basically make their products. And as you can see, often low-income housing is also found close by because you need unskilled workers to work in these industries as well. Now, our residential areas is where people live. Now, we can divide them up in middle to high income. Basically, middle and high income, you look at the property sizes, you look at the property value and how big the properties and the houses are. It's usually far away from the CBD because people don't want to be stuck and be close to the congestion of the CBD and the amount of pollution over there. And usually have good views, usually built on a conical hill or such. The house sizes are quite big, and if you look at the property stands are quite big as well. And if you look at the surrounding areas, you usually find shopping centers, quite nice shopping centers that surrounding these middle and low income areas to provide them with services. The low income areas, once again, the stand sizes, very small, unfortunately. Obviously, it houses the poor people and the buildings look very much the same. And informal settlements. Now, Gr12, once again, do not get confused between the difference between rural areas and informal settlement. The informal settlement is a settlement where people live but it lacks basic needs and services. It's usually your shacks. The materials that you use is plastic, wood and zinc. The conditions are unhealthy because there's not proper sewage. There's probably not enough running water. High poverty levels. Okay, that's our informal settlements. The reason why they develop on the outskirts of urban areas is because people are migrating from the rural areas to the urban areas. Now, our greenbelt areas, for instance, are parks for recreation. Now, people go there to just go and relax. And they are quite important because what do? They reduce the amount of pollution and they help cleanse the air and it reduces the noise level. And lastly, like we discussed, the rural-urban fringe is mixed land use, right? It's usually where the airports are or golf courses are. And there's very large property sizes over here and there's less developed areas, such as building and infrastructure taking place over there. Now, our next topic that we're going to have a look at is our land use models. Now, unfortunately, these land use models were based on our urban areas a long time ago. And over time, this land use models has changed its shape because of the influx of rural-urban migration and because of the land use, how people use the land in the urban areas. Now, this is just a simplification, just to show you the basis of how towns and cities were developed according to land use zones. Now, the land use models we're going to have a look at is the multiple nuclear model. The modern American Western city model doesn't actually apply to us. Third world city models, that's for instance South America and most of Africa, and we're going to look at the South African city model. That's quite unique because we're coming from an apartheid era and our cities was developed according to the apartheid laws. Now, most of our cities today is multiple nuclear models. What it basically means, we don't only have one CBD, but we have outlying business districts as well. Johannesburg, once again, a great example. You got Johannesburg CBD, and then you have Sandton. Durban is a very good example as well. You got your Durban CBD, and then if you move further away, you go to Umhlanga. That's an outlying business district. Now, the examples I want to show you, over there you can see the American Western City models. Please pay attention to the keys. That's your CBD over there. That's your outlying business districts over here. And as you can see, the light grey is your manufacturing, light industries taking place. But most of our cities are based on this model over there, the multiple nuclear model. As you can see, there's your CBD. If you look at the urban profile, very similar to that. You got your light industry surrounding the CBD, then you got your low-class residential areas closest, that's the zone of decay. Your high-class residential areas, as you can see, your heavy industries basically on the rural-urban fringe because of the amount of pollution. There's the outlying business district, and there's your middle-class residential areas. Outlying business districts is where other provide services outside of the CBD because the land is cheaper and it's less congested. Now, there's an example of third world countries. As you can see, your CBD right in the middle, your low income closest to it, your industrial parks furthest away because of the amount of pollution. And as you can see, your different income residential areas. But if you look at South Africa's model, and I want to highlight it over here, the apartheid government created buffer zones. Now, as you can see, the buffer zones over here, it might be roads, it might be railway lines, it might be green belts, it even might be a river. Now, these buffer zones was created to separate the black and the white people from one another. As you can see, there's the middle income white groups, high income and middle income. And separated by a road or railway was your colored areas and your African townships where the black people used to live, and your colored and Indian residential areas. And as you can see, the low income for white people was closest to the CBD. So they created these buffer zones to separate people according to race. Now, unfortunately, because of rural-urban migration, we experience a lot of settlement problems. Now, keep in mind, there's a great influx of people moving from the urban areas to the from the rural areas to the urban areas. And that causes problems for urban areas and very often for the CBD. So let's quickly have a look at these problems that we experience. Congestion, urban decay, and centralization. That's the three main common problems that we experience with rural-urban migration because of the influx of many people to urban areas. Now, if you look at congestion, biggest concern over there is the amount of cars on the roads. Unfortunately, cars create pollution and it makes the environment dirty. Now, there's too many people using their own cars, not enough public transport systems, and the all street planning. Now, what does it do? It creates pollution. More cars means more accidents. And obviously, it causes stress, road rage. I believe you've seen it definitely somewhere in your lifetime in South Africa. Now, obviously, there's solutions for it. Improve our public transport system. I mean, how many people can fit on the bus? Probably 20, 30 people. Immediately, one bus eliminates 30 to 40 cars. Okay, use lift schemes, for example. Carpooling, that's how it works in America. If, let's for instance, so why do people need to drive their own car? Let's make turns and carpool together, drive together to work. Okay, very importantly, because of the major influx of all the congested, that's the reason why outlying business districts developed. Many companies decided to move away from the CBD because it's too congested, too many people over there. And very importantly, synchronize the traffic lights so that the traffic can flow much easier. Now, urban decay is a massive problem, and the main cause for that is property owners not looking after their properties. Now, it's usually the CBD when it moves into the residential areas, the fringe of the CBD. And basically, there's too many people. There's not enough space for everyone living in the CBD. So what happens, unoccupied buildings, the people don't pay rent anymore. There's no landlords looking after the place, maintaining the place. So what happens? Slums develop. Now, the services and facilities decline. Most of the time, there's not even running water. The area becomes dirty and neglected. Now, what can people do? The owners need to take ownership of the building. They need to pay levies. They need to collect rent and to look after the place, make it more adaptable and better looking for the surrounding area, and improve the services and the facilities. And centralization. Now, unfortunately, because of the rural-urban migration, there's a high demand for land in city areas, but already there's too many people living in the urban areas. Now, keep in mind, it puts strain on services. For instance, garbage collection, water, electricity. And what does it do? It increases the pollution, increases health problems. It's destruction of the environment. Now, many greenbelt areas can't survive because of that amount of pollution taking place and the amount of garbage that's being created by the amount of people. Now, what's the solutions that we can do? Decentralization. Take some of these businesses away from the CBD. Now, obviously, stricter control, bylaws, and even fines on people that pollute, and definitely create more green areas, green belts like parks, plant more trees where people can go and relax. It's going to reduce the noise pollution as well. So basically, what we've looked at in this area, we looked at the types of urban settlements that we've just discussed. Now keep in mind, once again, it's where all the secondary and tertiary activities taking place. And then we look at the urban profile from the CBD to the rural urban fringe and your different residential areas. And then we look at our urban street patterns. Very important, keep in mind, you might get this in your map work paper. Remember, you need to be able to identify it and give some advantages and disadvantages of the different street patterns. And lastly, we look at our land use models and the problems that we experience in urban areas. Thank you for watching and see you next time.